In a small-town diner, a waitress refuses to stay silent when a group of men harasses a black customer. She stands her ground, but instead of support, she's fired on the spot. Humiliated and suddenly jobless, she steps out into the street with nothing but her pride and the conviction that she did the right thing. Just when she thinks she's hit rock bottom, her phone rings. The man she defended is calling, and what he has to say will change her life in ways she never expected. The diner was the kind of place where people didn't like change. A small, old-fashioned restaurant tucked away in a town where everyone knew each other, where the regulars had been eating the same meals at the same booths for decades. The walls were lined with faded pictures of local history, white faces smiling in black and white photographs, football teams from a time when integration wasn't even a question. The air smelled of bacon grease and fresh coffee, and the sound of forks clinking against plates mixed with low murmurs of conversation. It was a safe haven, but only for those who belonged. Outsiders were tolerated but not welcomed. She had worked here for a year, long enough to know which customers tipped well and which ones snapped their fingers for service, long enough to recognize which faces lit up when they saw her and which ones barely acknowledged her existence. Long enough to understand that this place had an unspoken rule: you fit in or you didn't. And if you didn't, you felt it. She wasn't from here originally, but she had learned the rules quickly. She kept her head down, did her job, and ignored the way some people spoke in hushed tones when someone different walked through the door. Then, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, he walked in. An elderly black man, well-dressed, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the world and knew exactly who he was. His suit was tailored but worn at the edges, his shoes polished but scuffed. He didn't hesitate at the threshold like some did, didn't glance around nervously as if expecting trouble. He simply walked in, found a booth in the corner, and sat down. She noticed the shift in the room immediately. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. Eyes flickered in his direction, then away, then back again. A group of 3 teenagers at the counter, the type who always spoke a little too loudly, laughed a little too aggressively, exchanged glances. One of them, a tall, wiry guy with sunburned skin and a cocky smirk, leaned in toward the others. "The hell is he doing here?" he muttered, just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The other 2 chuckled. One of them, a stocky guy in a baseball cap, shook his head. "Must be lost. Poor bastard doesn't know where he is." The third, a girl with bleach blonde hair and an oversized flannel, pulled out her phone. "This is going to be good." She clenched her jaw as she approached the man's table. He hadn't even picked up the menu yet when she stopped beside him, pen and notepad in hand. "What can I get you?" she asked, keeping her voice even, professional. He glanced up, offering her a polite nod. "Just a coffee, black, and whatever the special is today." "Coming right up." She turned toward the counter, but before she could take a step, the wiry guy slid out of his seat and sauntered over to the booth, hands in his pockets, a smirk stretching across his face. "Hey, old man," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "You sure you want to eat here?" "Don't think they got what you're used to." The black man didn't look up. He reached for the water glass in front of him, took a sip. The guy's smirk widened. "Guess you don't talk much, huh?" He reached out, lightning fast, and snatched the water glass from the man's hand, tilting it just enough for the remaining water to spill onto the table. "Oops, must have slipped." The girl with the phone snickered, aiming her camera. "Come on, say something for the people," she taunted. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "That's enough," she said sharply, stepping forward. "Leave him alone." The wiry guy turned his head toward her, eyebrows raised. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just having a little fun." Her voice didn't waver. "This isn't fun, it's harassment. Back off." The stocky one with the baseball cap snorted. "Oh, so you're on his side? That's cute." The wiry guy took a step closer to her. His breath smelled like cheap beer, though it was barely past noon. "You really gonna stick up for him over your own people?" His tone turned mocking, exaggerated. "What, you got a thing for them now?" The words hit like a slap. A few nearby customers were watching now, but no one spoke up. No one moved. She turned, looking toward the counter, toward the man who could stop this with a single word. The owner. He was standing with his arms crossed, an expression of thinly veiled impatience on his face, not anger at the boys, not concern for the man in the booth, just irritation that things were getting loud. She met his eyes, silently asking for backup. Instead, he sighed. "You don't want to make this a big deal," he said casually, like they were discussing the weather. "You know how things are around here." Her stomach turned. She had known, of course, had seen the signs, had felt the tension, had overheard the whispers, but she had never felt it so plainly, so blatantly, as she did in that moment. The black man set his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, still not saying a word, still calm, but his eyes, sharp, intelligent, met hers for the briefest second, and she knew what he was thinking. This isn't new to him. This isn't the first time. But it was the first time she had seen it happen right in front of her. And she wouldn't, just stand there. She turned back to the wiry guy, her expression hard. "Pick up the glass," she ordered. He laughed. "Or what?" Her voice didn't rise, but it was cold, steady. "Or I'll throw you out myself." The tension in the diner tightened like a noose. The stocky one whistled low. "Damn, she's serious." The wiry guy's smirk faltered just a little. Then, just as quickly, it was back. He stepped away from the booth, hands raised in mock surrender. "Whatever, lady. This place is going downhill anyway." He turned, grabbed the man's napkin off the table, and flicked it onto the floor. "Enjoy your meal," he sneered, before sauntering back to his friends. Her fists were still clenched as she turned back toward the counter, but before she could take a step, the owner's voice cut through the room. "In my office, now." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes again. He wasn't irritated anymore. Now he was angry. The black man was watching her, quiet but attentive. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to lift her chin. Then, without a word, she walked toward the back. She stepped into the back office, her heart pounding. The air was thick with the scent of old coffee and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to the walls no matter how often the place was cleaned. The office itself was small, cluttered with invoices and a dusty old cash register. The blinds were half closed, casting sharp lines of shadow across the desk where her boss stood, arms crossed, his face set in a mask of barely restrained irritation. She forced herself to stand tall, to meet his gaze head-on. "You want to tell me what the hell that was out there?" His voice was low, measured, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. She didn't hesitate. "I was protecting a customer." He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "A customer? That wasn't a customer, sweetheart. That was a problem waiting to happen, and you just made it worse." Her stomach twisted, but she refused to back down. "Worse for who?" she shot back. "For them? The ones who were harassing him? Or for you, because you'd rather let it slide than stand up and do the right thing?" His expression darkened. "Watch your mouth." She felt her fingers tighten into fists at her sides. "I'm not going to watch anything." They were harassing him. They were trying to make him leave, and you just stood there and let it happen? Why? Because you don't want to piss off the regulars? Because you think it's bad for business? She shook her head, her voice rising. "You think people won't notice what kind of place this is?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look rattled. If anything, he looked like a man who had already made up his mind before she even walked in here. "I don't owe you an explanation," he said coolly. "You don't like how things are run around here, then maybe this ain't the place for you." Her breath caught. "You can't be serious." He exhaled through his nose, as if this was exhausting him. "I am serious. I'm not about to lose business over some bleeding heart nonsense. You want to fight for every lost cause that walks through those doors? Fine. But you won't be doing it here." She felt her whole body go still. "You're firing me." "You're damn right I am," he said, stepping around the desk. "Come on, you think I'm going to let some waitress tell me how to run my own damn diner?" He pointed to the front of her apron. "Hand it over." For a long moment she didn't move. The weight of what was happening pressed down on her like a physical thing. She had been working here for a year. She had picked up extra shifts, covered for people when they called out sick. She had memorized the regulars' orders, smiled through rude customers, scrubbed grease off the floors when no one else wanted to. And now, just like that, it was over. Her fingers trembled as she reached behind her neck, untying the knot at the back of her apron. She pulled it over her head, folded it, and set it on the desk. Her boss didn't even look at her. "No, get out." She swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in her throat, and turned on her heel. She pushed the door open with more force than necessary, stepping back into the diner. The noise of the restaurant rushed back in, plates clattering, voices murmuring. And yet, it felt distant, like she was hearing it through thick glass. As she walked toward the exit, she felt the weight of eyes on her. Some customers had noticed the argument, had seen her storm out of the back. A few looked away awkwardly, pretending not to see. Others, the regulars, the ones who never had to question whether they belonged here, watched with barely concealed satisfaction. And then there was him. The black man was still seated at his booth, his plate untouched, his expression unreadable. She hesitated for half a second, then kept walking. She pushed the door open, stepping out into the cool afternoon air. The second the door shut behind her, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were still shaking. She hadn't thought it would hurt this much, but it did. The door opened behind her. She turned to see the man stepping outside, his gaze steady. Up close she noticed more details. The slight gray at his temples, the fine lines around his eyes, the kind of face that had seen things, endured things. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You didn't have to do that." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "If I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror." Something flickered in his eyes, something almost like approval. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, plain business card. No logo, no name, just a single phone number printed in bold black ink. "When you need a job," he said, holding it out to her, "call this number." She took it hesitantly, glancing down at it. "What is this?" "A door," he said simply. She looked up at him again, trying to read him. His face gave nothing away. After a moment he nodded once, as if he had already said all he needed to, and turned, walking toward the parking lot. She watched him go, her fingers tightening around the card. The door behind her swung open again, and she heard laughter, their laughter. The guys from inside, the ones who had started all of this, stepping outside, stretching like they had just finished a good meal. "Guess you won't be coming back here anytime soon," one of them called out, grinning. She turned to face them. She should have been angry. She should have shouted something, thrown the card at their feet, told them exactly what kind of people they were. Instead, she just smiled. Because for the first time in the past hour, she knew something they didn't. They thought they had won. They had no idea. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The events of the past hour replayed in her mind on an endless loop. The taunts, the spilled water, her boss's cold, dismissive stare, and the weight of that final order, "Get out." She had done the right thing, she knew that, but knowing didn't make it easier. She was jobless now, with rent due next week and no backup plan. The business card sat on the passenger's seat, the black-inked number staring back at her like a challenge. Her phone buzzed. She blinked, releasing a shaky breath before picking it up. A message from her best friend. "Go on Facebook now." Frowning, she tapped the notification and her newsfeed exploded. A video. Her video was everywhere. It had been posted by a customer, someone who had recorded the entire scene from the moment the group of men started harassing the black man to the second she was fired for standing up to them. The caption was simple but damning. "Waitress defends black customer from racist harassment. Gets fired on the spot. This is America in 2025. The numbers were rising in real time. 50,000 views, 80,000, 100,000. She scrolled through the comments, her pulse pounding in her ears. "This is disgusting. That diner should be shut down. She's a hero. Someone hire this girl. So the owner was totally fine with the racism, huh? Let's make sure he pays for it." Her hands trembled as she swiped through the reactions. Celebrities were sharing the video. Activists were tagging the location of the diner, calling for boycotts. Even news outlets had picked up the story. Small ones at first, but it was only a matter of time before it reached national headlines. The sheer force of the internet was taking hold, and there was no stopping it now. By the next morning it was everywhere. She woke up to a flood of notifications. People were demanding answers. Reporters were outside the diner with cameras trying to get a comment from the owner. By noon, the hashtag Boycott Joe's Diner was trending nationwide. The once buzzy diner now had empty parking spaces, its regulars afraid to be associated with the scandal. And then came the protesters. By day 3, hundreds of people gathered outside the diner, holding signs, "No room for hate, we stand with her, shut it down." They chanted, they marched, and they made sure the world knew exactly what had happened within those walls. The pressure mounted until the owner had no choice but to put up a "closed until further notice" sign. The local news covered it first, then national reporters picked up the story. They ran clips of the video alongside statements from civil rights organizations. Some customers who had eaten there for years spoke out, admitting they had witnessed similar incidents but had never said anything. But now, silence was no longer an option. Then the calls started. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Strangers offered her jobs, donations. Someone even suggested starting a GoFundMe for her lost income. It was surreal. Just days ago she was an anonymous waitress scraping by. Now her name was in headlines, people were calling her brave, and a small part of her was terrified. And then came the call that changed everything. It was early, barely past 7, when an unknown number flashed across her screen. Half asleep, she almost ignored it, but something told her to pick up. "Hello?" A smooth, professional voice answered. "Is this the young woman from the diner?" She sat up, instantly alert. "Who's asking?" "My name is David Marks. I work with Mr. Lancaster. He'd like to meet with you." She frowned. "Mr. Lancaster?" A pause. Then, with a kind of weight that suggested she should already know, he said, "The man you stood up for at the diner." She sucked in a breath. "I'd like to see you today," David continued. "Are you available?" She glanced at the business card still sitting on her nightstand. The same number. Yeah," she said quickly. "Where do I go?" David gave her an address, an office building downtown, the kind with glass windows that stretched to the sky, the kind she had never once stepped foot inside. When she arrived, she felt out of place. The lobby was pristine, with marble floors and a towering reception desk. Men and women in tailored suits strode past, barely sparing her a glance. The receptionist smiled when she approached. "Miss, right this way. Mr. Lancaster is expecting you." She followed in a daze, barely registering the hallways, the sleek glass walls, the weight of wealth in every polished surface. And then she was standing in front of an office so large it had its own sitting area. The man from the diner, Mr. Lancaster, stood by the window, gazing out over the city. He turned when she entered, the same unreadable expression on his face. "You look surprised," he said. She let out a nervous laugh. "That's an understatement." He gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit." She did, still trying to wrap her head around what was happening. "You must have a lot of questions," he said, watching her carefully. "Just one, really," she admitted. "Who are you?" His lips quirked slightly. "I own this building. And the one next to it. And about 20 others across the country." He tilted his head. "But that's not really what you're asking, is it?" She shook her head. He leaned forward slightly. "I wanted to see if you'd stand up for me when you had nothing to gain, and you did. That tells me everything I need to know about you." Her stomach flipped. "What do you mean?" "I'm offering you a job," he said simply. "Not waiting tables, not scraping by. I run a foundation, one that fights against the exact kind of injustice you saw in that diner, and I need people who aren't afraid to speak up." He met her eyes. "People like you." She blinked. "I don't need someone who just wants a paycheck," he continued. "I need someone with a spine, someone willing to take risks for the right reasons." He leaned back in his chair. "So, what do you say?" Her mind was spinning. A week ago, she was just another server trying to make rent. Now, she was sitting in a billionaire's office, being offered a job she hadn't even known existed. She thought of the diner, of her old boss, of the way he had looked at her like she was disposable. She thought of the men who had laughed as she walked out. They had thought she lost. She looked Mr. Lancaster in the eye and smiled. When do I start? Her new job wasn't just a desk and a paycheck, it was a mission. Mr. Lancaster made sure of that. He didn't sugarcoat things, didn't coddle her. He threw her into the deep end, made her work for her place. She spent days in community centers, talking to people who had lived through worse than what she saw at the diner. She sat in meetings with lawyers and activists, hearing the same story over and over again, just with different names and different places. A black man harassed at a restaurant, a woman denied a job because of her last name, a teenager pulled over for fitting a description. She thought she had understood before. She hadn't. One afternoon, as she was reviewing a case with Mr. Lancaster, he leaned back in his chair, watching her with something close to amusement. "You look frustrated," he noted. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. It's exhausting. Knowing how often this happens, seeing people get away with it." He nodded, as if he had heard this before, because of course he had. "It is," he agreed. "So what are you going to do about it?" She stared at him for a moment, then squared her shoulders. "Make sure they don't." A slow smile spread across his face. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The next time she checked the news, she saw what was left of the diner. It had officially shut down. The owner had tried to weather the storm, had given a half-hearted apology on local television, claiming misunderstandings and overreactions, but no one had bought it. His reputation was destroyed. The protesters hadn't stopped, and neither had the boycott. Eventually, he had no choice but to sell the place entirely. The article mentioned something about a new business taking over the location, a community-run cafe, diverse ownership, fair wages. She smiled. One night, as she was leaving the office, she found Mr. Lancaster waiting by the door. He wasn't dressed in his usual tailored suit, just a simple coat, his hands in his pockets. "Busy day?" he asked. She huffed out a laugh. "Aren't they all?" They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. Then she spoke almost to herself. "It's crazy how much can change from just one moment." Mr. Lancaster turned to her, smiling slightly. "It's not crazy," he said. "It's exactly how change happens." She looked up, letting the cold night air fill her lungs, letting the weight of everything settle into something solid, something real. She wasn't just some waitress anymore. She was someone who had stood up, and she would never stop. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.